Have you ever wanted to answer an injustice, but did you realize that silence was more powerful? Charles Dickens discovered this truth, and that's when it all started to change. Today, you will know the moment Dickens learned that silence can be stronger than 1,000 words, and how this lesson can protect you from unnecessary wear and reveal who is really worthy of your energy. From an early age, Charles Dickens has learned that talking about his own pain does not guarantee listening. When his father was arrested and his family touched, he tried to explain what he felt, but no one seemed interested. When he told his mother how he felt lost and alone, he found more silence than welcome. When he sought support in the few people around him, he heard only empty phrases or advice that made him feel even more guilty. And the more he spoke, the more he realized. No one wanted to hear the truth of those who were broken. It was like screaming in an empty room. How to beg for help in the midst of a crowd that follows its way without looking to the side. The boy Dickens has quickly understood that most people are not prepared to face the other's pain. They prefer the comfort of appearances. They prefer to believe that deep sufferings do not exist, or if they exist, that happen only with strangers. And so, little Charles fell silent. Not because it stopped feeling, but because you understand that certain truths scare. That some wounds, when exposed, bother those who never bled. That those who talk too much about their pain is treated as a burden. And that the world often prefers to hear success stories than confessions of failure. This discovery marked him deeply. He did not fail to want to be understood, but he learned to keep silence, to observe, wait, and it was in this silent space that the seed of his power was born. The ability to see deeply, to feel intensely, and later to transform all this into words that, instead of being ignored, would shake consciousness. The boy who shouted and was not heard became the man who would write stories that no one could ignore. But at that moment, as a child, he only understood that the truth scares, that the exposed suffering can move away, and that it is often necessary to find another way of speaking, not to be seen as poor, but to one day be real heard. At the age of 12, Charles Dickens already knew more about humiliation than many adults would experience in life. While other boys went to school, he faced exhausting journeys in a dirty factory, gluing labels at grease. Each day he started with fear and ended with exhaustion. Each hour was marked by screams of supervisors and the bitter silence of children who had no choice. And at home the loneliness was even greater. His father was in prison. His mother had left him in a pension room, and the world seemed indifferent to his pain. It was in this environment of abandonment that Dickens discovered something crucial: to say no use. Each attempt to express his anguish bumped into indifference. Every question about why it was happening was received with silence or contempt. And so, in the midst of daily humiliation, he realized that screaming for help only exposed him more. That sometimes the only way not to be crushed was to silence. But shut up was not giving up. It was strategy. As his lips closed, his eyes learned to see. He began to observe everything: the way the rich treated the poor, the details of the tired faces, the hypocrisy of appearances. He kept every scene, every injustice, as one who collects ammunition for one day to fight back. Not hatred, but with the truth. At that time, Dickens understood that silence could be strength, that keeping the words was not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. He saved his strength to the right moment, to the day his voice would have real power. And this choice, to silence, to observe, and to wait, that's what prepared him to become the man who would revolutionize literature and arouse asleep consciences. The pain taught Dickens that not every battle should be fought immediately, that there are times when it is necessary to resist silence, add pieces, learn from each blow, and that, at the right time, the word kept explodes more strongly than any scream. In a world that seemed to crush who was already fallen, Charles Dickens realized something few understand. Sometimes silence is the only armor that remains. While other boys in the same factory rebelled in small gestures of despair or begged attention that never came, Dickens chose the stillness. Not because he was weak, but because he knew that to survive, he would need to protect what was left of himself, his heart. Each day, by necklace labels and enduring glances of contempt, he saw, like those who tried to prove his value to the screams, only ended up of the. He understood that when the world does not want to hear, talking is how to throw stones into a revolted sea. Waves return everything in the form of frustration. Then he fell silent, and in that silence, he raised an invisible but indestructible shield. His silence was not cowardice, it was strategy. It was the conscious decision of not giving their emotions to those who did not deserve them. It was the care to preserve his dreams in a secret corner of the mind, far from those who would laugh at him for daring to dream. Instead of fighting for the attention of insensitives, Dickens saved each drop of strength to continue, and one day prove its value, not with words said in a hurry, but with words written forever. It was this choice that kept it standing up. While others were lost in hatred or conformism, he silently fed the flame that would make him transcend that environment. His silence did not make him invisible forever. On the contrary, it was the tactic that allowed him to observe more, to feel more, to learn more, until the day comes when his voice would find room to echo and no one else could ignore it. Dickens shows us that there are silences that are withdrawal, but there are also silences that are courage. He chose the second, and that's how he protected his heart, so that even in the midst of humiliation, there was still a space to dream. The boy who learned to silence to survive has transformed that same stillness into a gun that no one expected. As its fame grew, the criticism also came. Some said he exaggerated in the description of poverty. Others accused him of creating too much depressing stories for Victorian England, who preferred to close his eyes to his own wounds. But instead of getting into endless discussions, Dickens chose the same tactic that had saved his childhood: silence. He understood that he did not need to counter each poisonous word, every attempt to disregard his work or his courage. With maturity, he realized that every second expense trying to justify himself would be a second less writing the stories that really mattered. And so, let his pages speak for him. Each book was their answer. Each character, an impossible argument to ignore. Every well-written dialogue, proof that he did not need to explain himself, just continue. And ironically, the more silenced his critics, the more powerful his voice became. The English society, which tried to keep it under control with sarcastic comments and scathing criticism, found that there was no way to silence Dickens's pen. His silence was not omission, it was strategy. And each new work published, each literary turnaround, each elegant and relentless denunciation against social injustice became higher than any scream. Dickens teaches us that it is not always in the debate that we find strength. Sometimes the biggest answer is consistent work, the silent dedication, the unshakable faith in purpose. While many lost themselves in discussions that changed nothing, he followed firmly, using the pain he knew and the truth he had discovered to write chapters that would never be erased from collective memory. Dickens's silence is no longer just protection. He became his most powerful weapon, a weapon that to this day remembers the world that words born of suffering and transformed into art are impossible to silence. Chapter 5. The Day You Chose Not to Defend Yourself. Amid the growth of his career, Charles Dickens was not spared the traps that expect everyone who dares to disturb the system. Literary rivals, bothered by his meteoric success and ability to pull social masks, began to defame him into newspaper columns, questioning his talent, his character, and even his motivations. England, so skilled at judging by appearances, seemed anxious to see him fall. Many expected an aggressive response, a scandal, a public fight. But Dickens did something that surprised even his closest friends. He chose not to defend himself. He did not write inflamed letters, did not seek refuge in controversy, did not try to prove who it was. Instead, he concentrated his forces where he really mattered. He took his pen, sat down in the role, and began writing what would become one of his unforgettable books. With each page, he made it clear that his best defense would always be his work, your truth, your ability to move and awaken. While his detractors were busy spreading lies, Dickens was busy creating stories that would cross generations. And when the new book hit the newsstands, it was as if England itself stopped to read. Sales exploded. The criticism that mattered, that of the public, surrendered. And the words Dickens wrote echoed louder than any rumor. This choice revealed something essential about him. Dickens didn't need to spend energy proving anything to those who didn't want to see. I knew that the consistency of your talent would speak by itself. And so, he showed the world that sometimes not reacting is the most powerful reaction. That silence, when accompanied by action, becomes a roar that no one can shut up. Dickens reminds us that not all battles deserve our answer, that there is greatness to stay focused while others are lost to try to knock you down, and that the best way to overcome unfair attacks is to continue building something no one can destroy. Charles Dickens discovered early that silence is not just the absence of sound, it is a presence of reflection. It is fertile space where ideas germinate, discernment deepens, and courage finds roots. He realized that while many were wasting their voices to prove points in empty discussions, those who learned to silence and observe acquired a force that was not seen but felt, and later revealed in a transformative way. For Dickens, silence was not a black hole that sucked hope, but a secret ground where it was preparing to write stories that can shake consciousness. It was in the collection that he learned to listen not only to the world, but to himself, perceiving details that no one saw, understanding the pains that others hid. It was in silence that he cut his empathy, his quality not only a brilliant writer, but a spokesman for those who had no voice. He found that in quiet, the mind is organized. Emotions find place. Wounds begin to heal, or at least teach, and that only those who allow themselves to silence to listen can write to heal, to transform, to wake up sleeping souls. Dickens showed in each book that the noise may impress, but it is the silence it builds. What words said without pause rarely touch deep, but words that are born of respected silences carry the power to change lives, because it is in silence that the soul speaks, and only those who hear this voice can then speak, so that the other recognizes themselves. This is the force that is born of stillness, the strength of those who need not prove anything, but chooses to learn everything. The strength of those who understand that the biggest victory is not to scream louder, is to say at the right time what really matters. On his journey, Charles Dickens realized that there are times when stopping explaining is more revealing than any justification. When he decided no longer trying to convince everyone around, when he failed to wear out explaining each choice, every step, every decision, something extraordinary happened. Silence began to act as a filter. He separated who really supported him, who was just around for convenience. Before, as he explained himself non-stop, Dickens fed the illusion that he could keep everyone satisfied. But over time, he understood that some people would never accept their decisions, and that the insistence on being understood only exhausted it. When he's silent, he began to see clearly who remained by his side, even without understanding all the details. Those who trusted him not for the explanations, but for the essence, who saw their character without the need for speeches. This silence was hard. He showed that some who looked like friends were only there while they could judge or control him. But he also revealed faithful companions who, even without answers, remained present. People who loved the person, not performance, who knew that the value of someone is not justifying, but being true, albeit silent. Dickens found that silence is one of the most powerful tests for human relations, because those who really care does not require constant explanations. Those who really love it, even without all words, and who is only in interest disappears when the justifications cease. Thus, the boy who learned to silence to survive became the man who silent to discern, and this silence revealed much more than any talk. He showed who was who. And more than that, Dickens strengthened to move on without having to hold on to those who would never really support him. When Charles Dickens' life collapsed, when the memories of dark childhood came back as ghosts, when criticism hurt, when loneliness hugged him tighter than any friend, he turned to silence. Not an empty silence, but a silence full of meaning, a refuge where the cruel voices of the world could not reach it, a secret place where his ideas could flourish and his heart gradually found shelter. In these dark moments, while Victorian England followed noisy with parties, newspapers and intrigue, Dickens retired. He was alone for hours, walking on deserted streets or locked in his office. It was there, in deep silence, that he could put order in the inner chaos. Who remembered who he was and why he couldn't give up? Who found the spark needed to continue writing even when all around it seemed to conspire to put it on? And it was precisely silences that were born his most powerful works. Stories that not only have fun, but cured. Pages that not just entertained, but challenged asleep consciences. His characters, so full of pain and hope, arose from the nights when Dickens faced their own fears, silently, until the pain turned into words capable of illuminating the lives of others. He proved that silence is not empty. It is fertile ground. This is where the soul breathes, where the mind cleans the dust of the outer noise, where the heart finds the strength to beat once again. This is how many were lost in distractions and noise. Dickens chose to retreat to return stronger. Silence for him has never been prison. It was freedom. It was sacred space where pain became purpose and darkness, raw material for stories that, centuries later, continue to change lives. Charles Dickens did not write to impress, wrote to play. And the secret that made his words so impactful was not only what he said, but also what he chose to shut up. Because those who know silence understand the power of rhythm, understands that the breaks speak as much as the sentences, that a moment of stillness between two ideas can be more devastating than paragraphs full of adjectives. Dickens has learned that it is not just about writing much, but of writing right. That the most powerful word is the one that arises after the necessary silence. Their stories bind us because they are not an unbridled flow of words. They are carefully built, with cadence, with spaces that allow the reader to breathe, reflect, feel. And in these intervals, the emotion settles, the conscience awakens, the heart is touched. It was this ability to shut up at the right time that made Dickens more than a storyteller, made him an impact master. When he denounced injustices, he knew how to stop before indignation became a sermon. When she showed tenderness, she knew she didn't overdo it, so that the sweetness wouldn't turn on. When he exploited the pain, he interrupted at the exact point so that the reader would feel it, but not reject it. Dickens' words remain alive because they carry the mark of those who understood that silence gives strength to the voice, from whom he found that there is no unforgettable sentence without the pause that precedes it. And that writing is not just to release ideas, but knowing when to keep them, when to let them rest, when to allow the silence to prepare the ground for the next truth. He reminds us that those who speak all the time loses strength, but who knows how to shut up when he speaks makes the world stop to hear. Charles Dickens knew that while writing to change the world, there would be those who cheered for his fall. Rivals, critics, envious, all ready to distort their words, ridicule their stories, or question their intentions. But he also understood something that many never realize. To argue with those who do not want to learn is to waste energy. Dickens found that he did not need to counter each criticism or try to convince who had already decided to hate him. That often the best argument is the continuity of the work. Silence, when it is born of trust and purpose, is not cowardice, it is strength. It is an answer. It is proof that what they say about you does not define who you are, nor does it change what you were born to do. By choosing to shut up in the provocations, Dickens did not coward. He saved time to write more, to think better, to create works that would make his critics shut up. His books became his best answer, and his success, the greatest contradiction to what they said of him. Each story released was like a silent message. While you talk, I build. And so, with the serenity of those who don't have to scream to prove value, Dickens showed that the most complete victory is to continue advancing when they expect you to give up, that the well-kept silence is shield against empty provocations. May those who spend their voice fighting with those who do not hear with running out, but whoever remains focused on their purpose grows. He reminds us that silence is not synonymous with defeat. On the contrary, it is victory over who does not deserve their voice. It is proof that those who trust their way need not be distracted by the stones they throw against him. The vast majority expected Charles Dickens to react like any ordinary person, with anger, justifications, public fights, or inflamed words. After all, when attacked, it is natural to retaliate. But Dickens understood that answering as everyone expects is just to fulfill the predictable script that enemies want. So he did it differently. He chose the unexpected. He reacted with silence. This silence was not empty or passive. It was strategic and full of meaning. Because while the critics teased him, he continued to produce. As they tried to scratch their reputation, he wrote books that conquered crowds. While waiting for scandals, he offered Istasia that thrilled even the hardest of heart. And that's what confused his detractors. Instead of falling into the provocation trap, Dickens used silence as strength. And this unexpected reaction drew more attention than any discussion. The silence of those who did not need to prove anything transformed each attack into step to rise louder. Each time he was silent, more people wanted to hear what he had to say. Because when everyone screams, whoever chooses the silence stands out like a lighthouse in the midst of the storm. Dickens reminds us that the obvious reaction, the scream, the immediate outburst, the need to have the last word, rarely builds something. But the unexpected, controlled calm, the decision to move on without dragging on the ring of hatred, it catches the eye, inspires respect, and reveals greatness. This is how he transformed silence into power, a power that no one expected, and that, even today, teaches that sometimes the most powerful answer is not to react as everyone imagines, but as few have the courage to do. The time has come to transform everything you have learned on this journey into choice, in posture, in declaration of strength. Because the story of Charles Dickens proves that not every victory comes from the highest scream, many are born from the firmer silence. Today, it's time for you to affirm, with faith and courage, I choose the silence that strengthens. Say without fear. Say understanding that shutting up at the right time is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. That keeping calm while the world expects its explosion is proof of maturity. That protecting your energy, instead of wasting it with those who do not want to understand, is the act of who knows where you want to go. The silence that strengthens is not the silence that pretends not to feel. It is what organizes emotions. It is not silence that accepts injustice. This is what is prepared to act at the right time. It is not silence that makes you smaller. It is what makes your voice, when used, echo with twice as much power. Dickens taught us that wisdom is born when we stop explaining those who don't want to hear, when we stop reacting with each provocation, when we understand that the purpose speaks louder than criticism, and that, when choosing the silence that strengthens, we build bridges where others would only raise walls. Today, when declaring this choice, you put yourself above noise. You decide that your time is worth more than useless discussions, that your peace is more important than the approval of those who do not understand you, and that their silence, kept with purpose, will be the answer that many would never expect, but everyone will respect. Because wisdom protects more than 1,000 words, and whoever learns to shut up when necessary discovers that silence can be the most powerful weapon of all. Charles Dickens has tasted us that there is power in silence, that often silence is not omission, but strategy. And that victory does not come from screams, but discernment to choose when speaking and when only observes. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell here. Each word and each silence has the purpose to turn lives.